We're going to start by winding the bobbin. Your bobbin is a plastic or metal disc, and you want to make sure you have the correct size for your machine, or it may not actually fit in the machine, or it won't sew properly if it does. So the first thing we're going to do is put thread on the bobbin. And so I have a spool of thread here. And when you get thread, usually there is some kind of method for securing the thread so it doesn't unravel when you're storing it. On this particular spool, there's these rough edges at the bottom of the spool. And if you're sewing or winding the bobbin, the thread can get caught on that. So you want to make sure when you put your thread on the spool pin that those rough edges are towards the outside of the machine here. And that way the thread will feed more smoothly. And then most machines have a spool cap, and you want the flat side of the spool cap against the thread, and in fact right tight against the thread. And this keeps the thread from coming off, because when you're sewing or winding the bobbin, if the machine is moving quickly, it can actually pull the thread right off. Next, you're going to put this thread in the bobbin winder tension. The bobbin winder tension looks like a screw on the top of the machine, and there is a middle area here that the thread will actually slide right into. In fact, I'm going to pull a bit to make sure it's in there. You need tension on the thread when you wind it. If there's no tension and it's too loose, it may not sew properly in the machine. So you want to make sure you don't forget to have your thread running underneath that part of the machine. And then some instructions will tell you to take your thread and wrap it around the bobbin to start winding it. I don't prefer to do that because I find when I start winding it, quite often it will pull off. So I like to use a hole in the bobbin, and almost all bobbins have at least 1 or 2 holes. And I'm not fussy about which side of the bobbin you do this on, but it is important that you thread from the center of the bobbin to the outside. If you thread from the outside to the center, you can end up winding thread on the bobbin winder post instead of on the bobbin. So thread coming from the inside to the outside, and then you put this on the post, and you want to make sure this thread is coming out of the top hole, not the bottom one. Otherwise, again, it will wind on the post, and you just push it onto the post here, and then you push the post over to the side. Now the machine's not on, so I'm going to quickly turn it on. And this particular model will actually show in the computer screen that I am set up now for winding a bobbin. And pushing over, like I just did, also disengages the needle. When you're winding your bobbin, your needle should not be moving. And if it's moving, then you've missed something in the process of setting up, and you should check your instructions. Now, to start out with, all I'm going to do is push the foot pedal. I usually wind with the speed on a higher setting if you have a speed setting. Some instructions will tell you to use a lower setting because it will wind more evenly. So when you start, you want to hold this thread up so it doesn't get caught in the thread as it winds on the bobbin. And I just put a little bit of thread to start in order to secure it. And then I'm going to cut off this thread. And it's very important that you cut this close to the bobbin, because if you have a long thread coming out of this hole, when you use it in the machine, that thread can get caught and jam the machine when you're sewing. And then you push your foot pedal. And in this case, I don't need a lot of thread on my bobbin, so I'm going to stop. If I filled my bobbin, this mechanism would actually cause the bobbin to push back and stop winding once it was full. But you can stop it whenever you want, and then you simply use your scissors to cut your thread, and then you have your bobbin that's ready for when you're threading your machine. If I was using the same color thread I just put on the bobbin, I could leave my spool on the spool pin and then thread for the machine that way. But I'm going to use 2 colors so that you can see the difference as I'm working with the machine. So I'm going to put this pink thread on top. Now this one is a little different. The thread's secured area here is not as rough as on the other one. It actually has it on both sides. So on this one, I just do it so the thread comes up from behind and over the top and on the spool pin. And again, the cap flat side against the thread. So to start out with, the first thing you do is go behind a thread guide. And this machine actually has numbers and arrows to guide you in the threading. So number 1 is this thread guide. Now the bobbin winder tension's at the front of it, but we're going to work at the back area here, and you simply pull the thread behind and pull it forward. And sometimes you can hear a little quiet tick as you do that. And then there's a number 2 here that shows straight ahead, and I'm going to start down this slot right here. This slot contains the tension discs, and this dial here sets the amount of tension or pressure on the thread. When you're learning to sew, I call this the do not touch dial. It should be adjusted for your machine. It is specific to a machine. I can't just say use number 4. I need to actually sit down with the machine and test it and set it. So I tell my students, don't touch this. So you're going to go down past the tension. Now, one other thing to remember when you're doing this is that your presser foot should be up. If the presser foot is down, there's 2 discs in there and they close. And if they're closed, the thread doesn't necessarily pass between them correctly and the machine won't sew properly. So you want to make sure the presser foot is up as you thread through the top of the machine. So I'm going to come down, and then there's a little U-turn arrow here. So I'm going to go around the bottom of that and come back up. And now I'm looking for my thread take up, and I actually can't see it. And so what you do then is you turn the hand wheel towards yourself, and you keep turning until you can see the thread take up at the top here. And now I'm going to do another U-turn. I'm coming up on the right side of the take up, and that's important, and going behind it, and then you pull up and forward, and your thread needs to come right into the front of the take up. If it's just around the back, it can slip off when you start sewing, and then the machine won't sew properly. And then you're going to come straight down this slot again. At the top here, just at the bottom of where you see this number 5, there's another thread guide, and you just slide your thread behind that. There's a thread guide also at the very top of the needle, and again you just slide your thread into that. And then the challenging part, we want to thread the needle. The thread goes through the needle from the front to the back, and sometimes my students will take the needle out and try and thread it, and that usually does not work very well. Now, if you find that it's hard to get at the needle, you can put the presser foot down in order to thread your needle, just not when you're threading the rest of the machine. And sometimes I'll put my finger behind it because I find I can see the hole better. And presser foot back up. Now at the front of the presser foot, there's a little groove here. And when I'm sewing, I run my thread through that groove and out behind the machine, so the thread's out of the way when you start to sew. This area of the machine is called the throat plate. And in the throat plate is a little plastic door that gives access to the bobbin case. To open this, there's a little black button here. You just push it to the right and the cover pops off. And so this is where we're going to be putting our bobbin. Now there is a right way to put this in the case. So here I'm holding it, and I tell my students it should be a letter P when you put it in the case. So the thread's coming over the top and down on the left side. It should not be a G. If you put it in as a G, there's a part of it that won't thread properly and the machine will stitch, but it won't be a good quality stitch. So you want a letter P, not a letter G. And then you simply take the bobbin and drop it into the bobbin case. Now you're not finished yet. At the front of the bobbin case, there's this little kind of a dent there, or a groove. And I usually hold my bobbin because if I pull on this, the bobbin spins. So I usually hold the bobbin and you pull the thread over to the left into that groove. And what this is the tension for the bobbin. We talked about tension for winding the bobbin and tension when we were threading the top of the sewing machine. There is also tension that needs to be there for the bobbin in order for you to get a proper stitch when you sew. So the bobbin's now in the case, but there's one more step. So we want this thread to come up through the hole that is underneath the needle between the feed dogs. And on this machine, there are two ways to do that. First, you need to hold the needle thread. If you don't hold the needle thread while you do this, the needle thread goes down into the bobbin case, and you can get it back again, but then you have to start over. So I'm going to hold the needle thread, and then it doesn't matter what sewing machine you have, you can use this method on all sewing machines. So I'm going to be using the hand wheel. Turn it towards yourself, and you turn it, the needle is lowering and coming back up, and now I'm actually watching the take-up lever. I want to see it at the top of the sewing machine. And once it's there, I can see the green thread from my bobbin, and I can pull it through, and there's my thread ready for sewing. The second way to pick up the bobbin thread on this machine, it starts out the same. You still hold the needle thread, but this machine has this triangle button up here, and if you push this button, it moves the needle. So I can push it and the needle goes down. I push it again and the needle comes up, and basically that does exactly what I did with the hand wheel, except quicker. And then again, just grab that thread, pull it through, and you can cover up the bobbin area, and you are ready for sewing.